About 40 years ago, I was living here in Sausalito. I was the pastor of this church. I was living on a houseboat that I owned. And every morning I meditated after my son went to school. He was about 10 at the time. And in my mind's eye, a figure was in front of me with some people behind him. And he handed me a large silver tray. And it was empty. And I said, what am I supposed to do? And I reached out my imaginary hands, you know, like you do when you're in meditation. And I took a hold of it and I said, what am I supposed to do with this? And he said, fill it with food and feed people. And I said, I don't have anything to say. And the cronies laughed out loud. And that was the end. So I told that to people, trying to get an interpretation because it made no sense to me. And finally I just gave it. So then, some months later, my son and I had a disagreement before he went to school. And so when he did leave and I sat down to do my meditation, I was still upset. And so I said, I want to know what that is all about, that empty tray. And a quiet voice said to me, you are to put food on it and feed people. Whatever nourishes you, just pass it on. So you're getting one of those sermons today. I have a couple of friends that we get together with periodically, and I learn a lot from every time. One is Phil Novak. This is one of his books, and I'll read the back. Phil Novak is an award-winning professor and chair of the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies at Dominican College. He has studied and collaborated with Houston Smith for over 20 years. So that's who Phil is. The other person is Roger Walsh. He is an MD and a PhD, and he has the same job at the University of Irvine down by San Diego. And so this time we decided to walk. And we met Blackie's pasture and walked toward Tiburon and back. And when we get together, it's a very interesting combination because, you know, it's just three guys talking about common, ordinary stuff. And then something will come up, and one of these guys will be the master of that subject. And he, for a couple of minutes, will become the professor. And it is just so rich to be there. And wonderful. I always go home and write things down because I learn so much from these guys. And every once in a while they will say to me, now George, we had a situation come up. Now, what does a pastor do with that kind of information? And I make something up. You know? Anyway, we're good for each other, and we love getting together. And we are richer for it. So now, those of you who don't know, I am one of the pastor emeritus. Dr. Reverend Joe Carter is the other one. Is Sherman Cummings a pastor emeritus too? Reverend? He's not? Or is it just Joe and myself?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. And so I have, in my computer, I have a file called Sermons and a subtitle under that called Emergency Sermons. And emergency sermons are for days like today, when I find out at the last minute that I'm going to be here. So I started working on this sermon about 3 or 4 weeks ago. It's called Knocking on Wood. And of course it's about, you know, knocking on wood to get good luck and all that kind of stuff. Well, wouldn't you know it, but this week when we were on our walk, Phil started talking about that same kind of thing. And I said to myself, that's going to fit right into my sermon perfectly. And so you're the beneficiary of that, maybe. So I want to talk a little bit about this. It is not unusual to see someone who is in a playful mood say, knock on wood, and tap their head in a playful gesture. You ever seen that done? And matter of fact, we might tap on wood right now just for fun. You got a chair, a pew. And I've seen this gesture and this comment a lot. And here's the deep meaning. And I'm going to read this from what I got off the internet. Knocking on wood is thought to come from the folklore of an ancient Indo-Europeans, or possibly people who predated them. Now, the people who predated them, the reason that's so interesting is that's before they had a written language. So all of these things came down, with stories, and now we have a bunch of them in the Old Testament, and that's where a lot of them came. And if you study them carefully, you find out that these stories originated maybe in Babylonia, maybe in some other religion, maybe in Egypt, maybe anywhere, because now they, in their material, and here in the Bible, they have similar stories. Not identical, but similar stories. And where does it come from? It all comes from one source, and nobody knows where the source is anymore, because those people were talking, but they didn't know how to read or write. By the way, Bible translators, Wycliffe Bible translators, are doing this today. These are people, most of them PhDs, and they're in a religious organization, and they go into the jungle or wherever they can find them, and they find people who do not have a written language. And so they live with them, and eventually they write out their language, and then they teach them, and they produce a Bible that is in that language, and they teach people how to read. And so that is their ministry in the world, because they believe that the Bible is the Word of God and needs to be spread to everybody. So go back again. Possibly people who predated them, who believed that trees were homes to various spirits. So touching a tree would invoke the protection and blessing of the spirit within. Now it starts to make sense, doesn't it? Now, as some of you know, I used to teach the art of spiritual living at a drug rehab place. And a young man came before the class one day, and he said, "Are you Reverend McLaird?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, I'm not coming to your class." And I said, "Well, okay, why not?" And he says, "I'm an atheist, and I don't believe in any of that stuff." And I said, "Well, if you listen to my definition of spiritual living, maybe you'll change your mind." And so I said, here it is. Spiritual living is being as healthy as possible every day in every way. And I said, can an atheist practice that? Being as healthy as possible every day in every way? And he says, yeah. And I said, well, that's what it's about. I'm not going to try to convert you to some religion. Well, he became one of the best students. I mean, he was brilliant. He was articulate, and of course he was recovering from something, I don't remember what. And so if you're an atheist or you're an unbeliever, this is okay for you today. Now somehow this tradition has survived, that is, people believing in spirits. Now we know that in some of the Native American spirituality, they do believe this today, and they practice it. And so they will touch a tree, and they will evoke that. My wife and I went to Myanmar, and they have gnats there. Is that right? Gnats. These are little beings, and they live in spirit houses and every place else. And you don't want to offend them. And so you have to do certain rituals and do the rituals correctly. Otherwise, the gnats are going to get you. It's a big superstition. And leprechauns in Ireland, and on and on and on and on. And maybe you have some of your own. Now, what all of this is called in the scholarly literature is animism. And I'm going to read, this is from the dictionary. It's from a Latin word. It means breath, spirit, life. Is the religious belief that objects, places, and creatures all possess a distinct spiritual essence. Now, we do believe that to some degree, don't we? I mean, we come in here, don't we experience something different that we don't experience when we go to Disneyland? You get a different one? You got a different spirit there. You go to the 49er game, which is going to be on this afternoon, you get a different spirit there. And if you go to the Warriors games these days, you get a negative spirit. Potentially, therefore, everything has one living in it. Animals, plants, rocks, rivers, weather systems, how do you like that? human handiwork, and perhaps even words, as animated and alive. So that's the basic spiritual teaching. And this, according to Phil, this is stuff that people have been living and teaching for the last 50,000 years. Now, when Christianity, Judaism, Christianity, Buddhism, and Islam came along, a shift began taking place. And they said there aren't zillions and zillions of little spirits running around. There's only one God. So that became kind of the rule of the day, is I believe in one God, you know, the Nicene Creed, I believe in one God, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, so on and so forth. Now, I tell you this story. So, I'm out of seminary for about 6 months maybe. And that was in 1968. And the senior pastor did all the memorial services, but he was busy, and so I did this service. And I met with the family, and we went back to my office, and in those days I had a typewriter. And I typed in, and I'm going to make up the name because, you know, I don't remember her name. Margaret Elder is now in the loving arms of Jesus. And I said out loud to myself, George, you don't know enough to know that that's true. Wow. Now that was a big conversion moment for me, because that led me 4 years later to making arrangements to get out of the ministry. And the reason is I was not willing to spend my life teaching things that when I talked about it, I had a big question mark. And what all of that is dogma. And I've written about dogma. And the dogma is this. Dogma is in a safety deposit box. It is locked and is hermetically tightened. And nothing old ever gets out, and nothing new ever gets in. Okay, that's dogma. We do not teach dogma in this church. And if you want dogma, it's easy to find it. Just turn on your TV, and especially on Saturday night and Sunday mornings, and you'll get a lot of it. So now, I want to read something by Phil. Oh, so we were finishing our walk, and I said to Phil, have you written something about what you just talked about today? Oh yeah, he said, I have. I'm preparing some lectures, and if I remember correctly, he's going to give 18 one-hour lectures on this subject. And, you know, which is kind of like what professors do. Yeah. And so then he went home, and he wrote me 5 or 6 long paragraphs about all this, and I'm going to read one short one for you. Thus, animism, belief in spiritual beings, is thus the oldest religiosity of the human species. Believing in spirits. So, try this sometime. It's a great experience. You're out at night, and the moon and the sun is going down, and the moon is coming up, so they're both here. And pretend that you do not know language, and you can't read, and all of a sudden you look at the sun and you call that Father. And you look at the moon that's coming up in the east and you call that Mother. And you look at the stars, and because they are twinkling, you know for sure they're alive. And so they must be beings of some sort. And maybe they are the children of God the Father and God the Mother. Try to go back. It's a wonderful, wonderful experience. And it's easy to see why primitive people would think that the sun was in fact God the Father and the moon was in fact God the Mother. And they also believed that storms were caused by God and Mother being angry over things that we did. And in psychology we call that magical thinking. So magical thinking is a little kid who gets mad at his mother or father and says, you know, I don't like you anymore, I don't want you to be my parent anymore, you are not my mother, you're not my father. And so then the little boy goes to school or whatever, and his mother falls down and breaks her arm. He comes home, finds out about it, and he says, I caused that. Okay, that's magical thinking. So what went on in the ancient world was magical thinking took the place of logical thinking that we are trying to do these days. All right. It was the first and the oldest religion for humans, but has been and still is the most prevalent form of human religiosity so far, easily distracted, even if it is distracted by labels such as Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, Christianity, Judaism, Christianity. Oh, he said that twice. You can tell he's writing spontaneously. And Islam. I think he did that twice too. Put it in a homely way. Ask that religion. Ask my mother what religion she was. She would always say, I am Roman Catholic, which is monotheistic, one God, but still, and billions like her all over the world and all the cultures have already been acting as if they are profoundly animistic. And so all of those, the animistic things come when we take our theology and we mix it in with superstition. So if I pray before every meal, God is going to protect me from eating anything that's wrong or dangerous. There was a religious movement in the United States when it first started, and there was 2 prayers around the meal. The opening prayer was that God would bless the food. And the closing prayer was thanking God that they didn't eat something poison and killed them. When I found that out, I said, oh boy, I'm not going to quit praying for our meals. Now, so what Phil is saying is we need to ask the Creator of existence to help us to improve ourselves so we become authentically Christ-like. So that means that we, instead of going, and there's a scripture that gives us really clear ideas about that, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil by doing good. So it's not a direct fight against evil or the evil person. It is that you dedicate your life to doing good, even to the people who do bad to us. I met yesterday with a black pastor, and we were talking about this kind of thing. And he was talking about the names that people have called him at different times of his life. He says, you know, we have come to realize that when people call us those names, they are afraid of us. That's where it comes from. That's the simple bit. They don't really hate us. They are afraid of us. And so our response needs to be a loving response, not an attack kind of thing. Now, so Roger, right after our walk, gave Phil and myself this book. Now, this is about Taoism, a Buddhist tradition. Roger's not a Buddhist, but he loves the Buddhist stuff. And the Tao is the way. And the way is that everything in existence is connected. That's the way. And so we are to see ourselves as a part of an immense creation that goes on thousands of light years in every direction. Now, just think about thousands of light years. That's a long time. Thousands and thousands of light years. If you have an app on the sky, I forgot what it's called, but you can go and you tap on a particular star, and then if you tap on it, and it gives you how many light years away it is. So, on some of the stars, it goes back 50,000 years, that the light that we are seeing now is just now getting here, and it started 50,000 years ago. So that star may not even exist anymore. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that in. So here is one of the way the Tao would say that we are to act. There is only one way to cleanse oneself of these contaminations, and the contaminations are resentment and hatred and vile things and stealing and lying and cheating and all those things. There is only one way to cleanse ourselves from these contaminants, and that is to practice virtue. So I am therefore suggesting that that be really good for us, to practice virtue, whatever that means. And we have a bunch of people here, and if we try to define a virtue, we'd get a lot of wonderful things. Maybe we'll do that in a minute. But now, the conclusion of the sermon is going to be given by Claudia Webb, who told me a magnificent story downstairs in the kitchen. And you notice we put this together at the last minute, and it's okay. Come on. No, come up here. Unless you're too bashful.
So a friend of mine told me this story, and I think it's a wonderful story to share. There was a woman traveling at an airport. She was pregnant, and she had an 18-month-old toddler who was completely uncontrollable at the moment, running around, temper tantrums, screaming. She was exhausted, she was tired, and just couldn't handle it. In frustration, she finally sat down, put her head in her hands, and started crying. 6 women in the terminal came up and surrounded her and her child. And one of them started singing to the child. The other one brought out a toy from her purse. One of them sat down and just comforted her and stayed with her until she and the child had calmed down. Not a word was said. Nobody knew each other. Finally, when she and her baby were calm, they were able to get up and go back, get on the plane. And everyone just dispersed. Nobody said a word. Just a beautiful story.
Thank you, Claudia. So now the sermon will continue with spontaneity again.